My name is Hans Gova. I'm Norwegian, and I was diagnosed with PH back in 2005. So it's actually been 19 years living with this disease. And I'm doing quite well. I'm still on monotherapy. And I started the Norwegian Association because there was no association in Norway. We became part of PHA Europe. And then I started getting more involved with the PHA Europe work, and somebody else took over the Norwegian Association. I've done a lot of tasks with PHA Europe, and one of the most interesting things I participated in was being part of a task force for the World PH Symposium. I don't know if everyone is familiar with what the symposium is, but this was initiated in Geneva in 1973, and it was only 13 participants at this first meeting. And their key objective was simply to understand the basics of pH. And then the next time they met was in 98, and then they met in 5 years intervals up until 2024. And the key objectives have changed somewhat now. Now it's more to promote knowledge exchange by sharing the latest research and clinical advances, promote collaboration and networking, update and development of guidelines, educate healthcare providers and stakeholders, and raise awareness for PH. And during this last 7th symposium, there were approximately 1,700 participants. I had the pleasure of being part of one of these task forces. So they divide things into working groups, and they had 15 working groups. And in 2018, it was the first time that the patient was involved in this work. And they were the last task force and the last to present. And I think many had left the conference area at the time. So they did something different this time. They let the patient task force be number one. So we had the pleasure of opening this conference. And I think this was very fitting, and it showed their willingness to let the patient be in the center. So for me, it was a great thrill. You know, I was one of the presenters. So I remember my son sent me a video of him bungee jumping. And I was thinking, I've never done stuff like that. But what I've done instead, I talked in front of 1,700 specialists. Our work resulted in this presentation at the symposium, but also in some proceedings. And these proceedings were published in the European Respiratory Journal on August 29th. So anyone that wants to have a look at that could go into the journal and read not only our proceedings, but also the proceedings from the 14 other task forces. We had 4 doctors on our task force. It was Jimmy Ford, Simon Gibbs, Adam Tubitsky, and Victor Moles. We had 2 patients. It was me and Colin Brunetti from the PHA Association in America, and 1 former patient who has gone through a double lung transplant, Pisana Ferrari, and then a patient advocate, Gergely Metsaros. We ran our presentation by Colleen, starting with an introduction. Her main thing was no decision about us without us. And she also talked about how it was for her personally to live with PH. Then Adam talked about the past of the patient associations, how things started in the US around this kitchen table, and also the start of PHA Europe. One of the first questionnaires where they talked to patients about quality of life and life expectancy. Even at that point, many years ago, they talked about how the patients, instead of living longer, they wanted to live with better quality of life. But I guess all people are different. One of my big things is I want to live as long as possible. So maybe I would feel a little different than other patients. And then Jimmy talked about the global assessment of patient priorities. And he started with a great quote, I think. He said, "The good physicians treat the disease. The great physicians treat the patients who have the disease." And we talked about how the patients, they need expert multidisciplinary teams, proper diagnosis, access to medication, and a patient-centric approach. And one thing we have done in this task force is also we have collaborated with teams around the world. So a small team of global patients and providers. And we gave them a survey to learn about the situation of PH care around the world. And it was very interesting to get their feedback because often we are very centered around US and Europe. And here we got more feedback on PH care all over the world. One of the things they talked about was that in many places they don't have enough expert centers. They have also poor access to right heart catheterization. And as we know, if you don't have a right heart catheterization, you don't really have a proper diagnosis. They have lack of medication in many places. In many countries, you have lack of transplant options and also lack of rehab centers. And what we see also is that there is a big difference between global south and global north. And this is something that needs to be handled in the future. Jimmy talked about one way of handling this is that we have more cross-border collaboration. Also, PVRI recently had a survey with about 3,500 responders from all over the world, from 88 countries actually, and they point out many of the same things that these experts that we talked to also pointed out. Then Pisana talked about the patient associations and how we have come a long way since the beginning, how they are much more professional and structured now than before. But we still work on some of the same things, for instance, awareness. We have the World PH Day on May 5th. We have the Awareness Month in November, Rare Disease Day on February 29th. And of course, also work like PH Aware, creating a lot of awareness for PH. We are also involved in advocacy in a totally different way now than before. We are a part of steering committees and trials, working together with the regulatory authorities, etc. And also for the first time in 2022, patients were invited to take part of the PH guidelines. We expect that this will also happen for the next guidelines that will come out soon. Then Simon Gibbs and we talked about the importance of PROMs, patient-reported outcome measures. These are just simply surveys that the patient fill out before he goes into the doctor. And then you facilitate the dialogue between the doctor and the patient. So shared decision-making will be much easier when you use PROMs. There has been a change also in this. In 2011, 20 European expert centers reported that about 20% of them used PROMs. And in 2022, about 65% of them used PROMs. And I talked about how I used PROMs. Actually, I developed my own PROMs to kind of track my disease. By doing this, I could see if I was too active or not active enough and how my activity level and other things influenced my disease. So I think that's actually one of the things that has made me live so long with this disease. And also surveys have shown that if you use PROMs, then the patient satisfaction will increase. And also you can use PROMs to identify risk factors. And as I said, with PROMs, then you have shared decision-making. You enable this in a much better way than if PROMs are not used. And then we talked about future directions. This was Gergely that talked about this. He talked about that in the future. I think we will see more and more that patients are regarded as partners to healthcare providers. He talked about collaboration with all stakeholders. I think when you introduce patients into committees, into trials, into work that normally have been reserved only for healthcare providers, I think you eventually drive the science forward. You enable what patients regard as important to be in the forefront of all the work you do. Patients' involvement is really important in all aspects. And of course, this also puts a burden on us as patients or requirements. We need to empower ourselves in order to be able to take part of discussions. As we ended our symposium, the words we had there about how we patients will be partners. And I think this will benefit the entire industry and also patient PH care, of course. You don't ask to be part of any committees. They come and ask you. It's a great honor to be asked to be part of this work because we know that this work is very important. It's a great honor, but also a great responsibility because I will be talking on behalf of a lot of other patients. But, this is the good thing about having this disease and lived with it for 19 years is that I know how it is to live with it. And I know what the priorities are, and I know how the other patients feel like. It's not so difficult for me to tell what the important things are for other patients and to be their voice, to put it that way. We get great feedback whenever we as patients talk to HCPs and also the pharma industry. The feedback is always very good. I liked the feeling of standing on stage and looking out at the audience because you just see open faces everywhere and people are very open to your message. And I remember talking to a person and he said, as a patient, you can really say nothing wrong because everything you say is right. This is how it feels like to be a patient. I think also we are welcomed into this community. And I think also it's a process that once you start to involve patients in this type of work, there is no going back. The patients will just continue getting more and more involved in all aspects of PH care. Well, I'm great optimistic on behalf of the patients. First of all, because we see medical advances, and now we see kind of a new era of PH medication. So we kind of understand that as the year goes by, we will have better and better medication, and then hopefully in not too long, it will be a disease that will be manageable. And also I have great hope for the patients being more and more involved in the different aspects of the science, the trials, committees, regulatory authorities, in all aspects of PH. So this was a quick summary of the symposium. And for me, it was kind of a highlight of my work with the PH community. My name is Skara, and I'm aware that I'm rare.